I'd like to introduce you to IBM Cloud Private, which delivers 4 key aspects required of any enterprise cloud strategy. It delivers elastic runtimes for enterprise developers, allowing them to take advantage of modern development techniques and architectures on the cloud. It delivers cloud-ready IBM middleware so that you can better manage your existing investment in IBM processes and tools right on top of the same Kubernetes environment. It delivers a production-ready operation story so that you can tie into your existing tool chains inside of your data center or leverage the built-in support for identity and access management, logging, monitoring, certificate and key management. It also delivers built-in support for continuous delivery so that developers can quickly become productive on the platform. Let's take a look at these features in the demo. Here we see the dashboard of IBM Cloud Private representing nodes, shared storage, and running applications. Let's take a look at some of the elasticity properties of the workloads. We're going to pick an application that's running Nginx, a simple reverse proxy server. Here, the stateless application defines its policies for how many replicas need to be up and running. And if we destroy one of these, we'll find that it quickly brings up a new instance to replace the lost one, allowing client applications to avoid experiencing any downtime. And this notion of how the policies are defined is simply built into the fabric of Kubernetes. This allows us to take advantage of those elastic properties we talked about earlier. Stateful sets can also take advantage of elasticity, allowing us to define the desired replicas and then to manage existing middleware like MQ, but packaged as a stateful workload in Kubernetes. Now, in this example, the MQ workload we see was actually deployed as part of our catalog. We define lots of different products that are part of the catalog out of the box for both x86 and Power platforms. And in particular, you'll see the first versions of middleware that we're delivering here, including Microservice Builder, MQ, and DB2. The PowerPC workloads allow us to run these workloads on IBM Power Platform in one heterogeneous cluster if we so choose. DB2 again is packaged in a simple to deploy fashion that allows developers to stand it up, or MQ to manage their messaging layer, again using the same simple click interface that we saw before. And of course, Microservice Builder allows us to put together all of the pieces needed for continuous delivery. So here, let's take a look at deploying a simple service. We'll deploy this into our cluster, defining through replicas, and it's going to create for us a stateful set, bringing up each of the different replicas for Redis in order so that any of the semantics about how Redis replicates information is actually maintained. And so what's neat about this is we're comparing stateless services with the example we saw earlier with stateful services like a caching service or the examples that we saw around DB2 or MQ. Now it's important though that delivering a cloud platform also ties in with the existing data center management techniques. And so we build in support for operations right out of the box, allowing you to provide monitoring, log collection, integration with corporate identity management tools or other, or tie into your existing systems. And as we also said, for developers, it's important that we can deliver new changes very quickly. So out of the box, the Microservice Builder package we saw in the catalog earlier allows us to stand up a ready-to-go Jenkins with an elastic worker pool, and for each commit that we delivered into our GitHub, our Jenkins service, which is also running on the platform, is building and producing new images for us, allowing them to be ready to be deployed quickly by development teams and even promoted all the way into production. Thank you for watching.
Richard, you may proceed with the presentation. The video section is already over.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I must have missed that. All right. So welcome everybody, and sorry for the little bit of the hiccup and the delay, but welcome to the session. And what I'd like to do is spend some time with you today to talk about microservices and some of the logistics about going through and deploying it. As we can say today, cloud is a technology for transformation. And as we look at some of the driving factors that go through some of the transformation, if you'd spoken to me earlier, about 18 months ago, it would have been all about cost. It would all have been about how do we make the infrastructure more efficient. How do we lower the costs in terms of speed to deployment, and how do I best make use of all of my hardware? So it was really about virtualizing servers. I take existing hardware and I virtualize it, and I put it into a consolidated set, and then I can share and reuse infrastructure across a common set of services. But what we're seeing now today, with the transformation to cloud, we're seeing the need for speed, and the need to actually take some of these applications and transform them, and modernize them into to be able to take use of PaaS, some extra data, and some different types of engagements. And so what we're seeing now is some of the enterprises that we're used to talking to, going through and determining how do they get speed, how do they, not only do they use their infrastructure efficiently, but how they get speed and how they come to the market faster. What we're also seeing on top of that is that the need to transform. So once I have all of the cloud-ready capabilities built into my applications, how do I transform them? How do I actually reuse some of the processes that I've got, but add in some modern capabilities in terms of scalability, blockchain, some cognitive, and how do I really expand and bring in some innovation into it? So if we look at the market and we look at some of the customers that I talk to on a regular basis, we're seeing that about 20 to 30% are still really doing this consolidation piece. They're taking servers, they're virtualizing them, they're putting them into large server farms. 70 to 80%, so this is where the real major shift in the landscape is coming. 70 to 80% of customers are taking some of those virtualized environments and they're putting them into containers. They're starting to modernize them. They're starting to bring in some different types of applications and looking at what they really do with them and how they become more agile. A lot of customers, unless you are a born on the cloud customer, the intent is there. There's not many enterprise customers that are actually cloud first and actually taking their new applications and designing them for the cloud. Most of them are taking them through this path where they're starting virtualizing, containerizing them, and then bringing them into the cloud first. There are some challenges that we have along the way with all of this. And what I'm going to do through the next piece of this is go through some of the challenges that you need to have to face to be able to go through some of this adoption in terms of the landscape that you need to go through as an enterprise and bring some of these applications forward. Okay. As I said, it's really taking your existing application and it's taking them. It's doing the standard lift and shift, taking a bare metal container and standardizing it, bring it into a VM, and really putting it into these server farms. It's allowing you to then add automation. I can then quickly stand up another VM. I can move them around. I can shift them into other areas, and then I can also push them up into the cloud. So I can take my existing VMware farm, and really the first foray that we have for customers going into really the public cloud is taking these VMs and shifting them up into the cloud and saying, hey, I don't want to run them locally anymore. I don't want to run them inside of my enterprise data center. I want to run them in the cloud. So it's really this lift and shift piece of it, and really bringing it to a cloud-based application. What they're determining is a cloud-based application, but really it's a VM which has the ability to run on-prem or on the cloud. And the next pattern that we're really seeing a lot of customers doing is taking that and containerizing it, exposing it, and extending it. So they take all of the applications that they had in terms of a VM and take it to the next step. There was a lot of inherent inefficiencies in actually taking a VM container up into the cloud and running it up there. And containers fixed all of that. It allowed that extra speed. It allowed the extra flexibility to be able to take that code and expose it as an API. And then extend it and then integrate it. So the second pattern that we're really seeing is this containerization of the VMwares and the code that we're pushing through. And then the third pattern is the refactoring. So once we have an application that has been containerized, we can then start to look at how do we refactor it, how do we create it, how do we break it down into these cloud-native microservices, which we'll talk a little bit about shortly. And what are some of the things that we need to be able to do in terms of building these microservices. And once it has been refactored, you can then start to take use of some of the cloud-native abilities that we talked about before. You can start to bring in some blockchain, you can start to bring in some cognitive, some AI, and some of these solutions that you can then natively use inside of these, it can combine inside some of these microservices. So those are really the three patterns that we see as part of this path for evolving applications into the cloud. Now, I put this dotted line on the bottom there because there is a fourth pattern that really comes along with the first three, and it comes hand in hand, and it's what do we do with the data? There is a set of data that needs to be potentially moved with the application, and whether we do lift and shift, whether we do the containerization, or whether we do the refactoring of it, the data classification and movement still needs to take place. And there's a piece around governance and what do we do with the data. And the advice that we always give customers is take the data and move it with the application. Keep it close to where it needs to be. You don't really want to have data which is miles away and on-prem if it's needed to be upfront with the application. So there's a whole set of data classification and governances, governance components that also needs to happen around these three existing patterns that we're seeing customers go through today. Okay. What I went through next is as I walked through what needs to happen in terms of a modernization roadmap. So we know the three areas that customers are concentrating on. We know most customers right now are concentrating on the containerization piece of this. And really, I looked at what are the individual steps that you need to have if you move down this roadmap. So we're starting from the left, where we have traditional workload, which is running on-prem, and I'm going to use the word monolithic. Okay, and it is running inside an enterprise data center, and it's using a traditional middleware stack, and hopefully it's an IBM middleware stack, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. But it is an application which is bundled together, and it goes inside of a application server. So most cases we'd be looking at WebSphere, and it is a WebSphere cluster using all the traditional pieces of component. So the next step really was to take all of that, put it into a VM, virtualize it, as we said. So this becomes pattern number 2, where they virtualized it, they ran it inside of their own cloud. And really, they got the efficiencies based on hardware, so they could share CPU and RAM across multiple applications, and really make good use of the hardware. And so we have a cost optimization piece of this. It wasn't really transformational as such. It was still taking the traditional applications and still doing the things that we would normally do with it. Where we're seeing customers today, as I said, is pattern number 2, where they're taking their monolith and they're containerizing it. But not only the actual application itself, but they're also containerizing the middleware, right, and individual components that are inside of it. So that becomes what we're terming a cloud ready, and you'll see these terms as we go further down the presentation. But a cloud-ready application that is containerized and is able to take use of CaaS, and that is container as a service. And the reason we say CaaS is that the container doesn't necessarily have to be predefined. So it can be anywhere. It can be on-prem, it can be in the cloud. It can be a couple of particular use cases. Is once we get it containerized, of what do we do with it? in terms of managing the containers. And then yes, we take our containers and we add in what is commonly known as the 12 factors. So there is a 12 factors that we need to be able to bring to our application for them to be able to take best use of the cloud. Okay, and so once we have a containerized application that has been 12-factor apt, if you like, it gets the terminology cloud-enabled. Okay, and you'll see pieces of this as we move here. How do we take a monolithic application and add the 12 factors to it for it to become cloud-enabled? And that's really the next step. And then once we've done that, we can then take that containerized piece of it, and then we actually can start to build the microservices. I can take a piece of my monolith and I can build a particular microservice for that function. And I start to split out different areas, different pieces of code, and what I do is I use loosely coupled APIs to bring the microservices and get them to all communicate and talk together. So really I've gone through multiple steps in this journey, in the modernization roadmap journey, to get from the far left-hand side, where I am a monolithic application running on-prem using traditional middleware, to a microservices application actually able to make use of the cloud-native abilities, and really it's using PaaS and CaaS side of things. It's key, and we like to be able to distinguish between cloud-ready, cloud-enabled, and cloud-native. And the reason we do the cloud-enabled step to go from the monolithic to the microservices is if you don't have some of these 12-factor abilities built into your application, then you're not fully able to make use of all the cloud features and functions. And all you're really doing is you're taking a monolithic application, breaking it into smaller chunks and running it into the cloud. You're not really making use of all the abilities and features and functions that the cloud provides you. And so it's key to be able to look at the particular 12 factors and make sure that you build them into your application as part of this transition going into microservices. I speak to a lot of customers about, the 12 factors. You go and do a bit of research. This is not an IBM piece of technology. This is industry standard. Wasn't developed by us. And a lot of customers, when they adopt it, they look at all of the 12 of them and say, well, you know what, I'm only really interested in the top 10 or 8. So you don't necessarily have to do all 12, but you do need to have a certain number of these in terms of making sure that your application is able to make use of the cloud, and you're not just taking a monolithic, breaking it up into smaller pieces and running it somewhere else. So there are some key steps into all of this. Okay, so there's a recipe, and there is a group of people. We have done this before, and it's a very large team that will be able to go through and do all of this. But there are some key components that we like to be able to do, and really the first one is around assess and plan. So you need to be able to come in and look at the particular workloads that you do want to have modernized. Not all workloads will be able to be moved to the cloud. There's a certain set and component of them that will require to be left where they are, and there are very good reasons for that. Some will never move. Some will remain as a VM, and that's pretty much a given. But there are a large set, as I said 70 to 80% of workloads are actually able to be moved in some form or fashion into it. There's an extract phase of this, and we'll look at tools, we'll look at particular pieces of how we can extract an app and go through it, and we'll have an example here of how we can do that for a WebSphere app. We containerize it and deploy it to the cloud, extend it, with the blockchain and all the other pieces of this. So this containerized app and deploy it is where we start to bring in the 12 factors. And then when we extend it, it's when we start to use all the abilities that the cloud can bring to you. And then, of course, we have to manage it. And then so there's a whole piece around the DevOps and managing of this application. And so we have a set of best practices and standards around doing this from start to finish. Customers are in various stages of this themselves, but we have a large team that's able to do this as well. Okay. If there's one key slide, one key takeaway that you could take from this session, it's probably this slide. It doesn't look important. It's kind of a busy slide. But this slide is not about technology. It's not about the application. It's all around the things that you need to do in order to get the application to move. You can have a group of millions come in and spend a month writing a microservices application. But if you don't do the things that are on this slide, you will not be successful. These are the things, this is the secret sauce, if you like, the things that you need to be able to do in addition to the technology pieces of writing a microservices application to be successful. Okay, and we'll go into each of these in quite some detail. So the very first one that you talk about is culture and organization. Okay, it's really funny if I go into a customer and I say, hey, I'm going through this cloud adoption transformation, and they haven't taken that into account, then they fail. Very, very simple. Number of times that I hear the enterprise, the data center guys sit there and say, these cloud guys, they're a bunch of cowboys, they're out of control, doing this stuff. They're going to be the death of us. And then you go and talk to the cloud guys, and you hear them come back and say, oh, these data center guys stick in the mud, no change, can't do anything, don't know how they actually manage to do anything at all. So if you don't handle this sort of friction and culture and organizational change, you will fail. You can't take what you did in the enterprise and do it in the cloud. It just doesn't work. So there are a whole bunch of cultural and organizational changes that you have to take in consideration along with these microservices changes as well. You have a bunch of architectural and technology decisions to make. I'll put a slide up shortly which talks about some of those decisions that you do have to make, and you need to be pretty clear about them. The ones that you want to make. If you're talking about an enterprise traditional classic on-prem, those decisions are pretty closed. There's not too many to make. They're pretty well known, and people know what they're doing. In the cloud, not so much. Most of it's open source. Most of it changes. You've got the flavor of the month for the next 6 weeks, and you really have to keep an eye on some of the technology and the architectures and the way that they're actually doing things to keep the teams under control. So there are some key technology decisions that you have to make. Security and compliance. So security guys, they are your best friends. They are not a pain in the butt. They do their job for a very particular reason. Trust me, you do not want to be the next company that, it's the headlines, 150,000 employee records exposed on the internet. The security and compliance guys are the ones that will help you and protect you. So you need to make sure that they are on board, that everything is all kosher and done, and that the security compliance piece is complete around your application. They are your friends. They do not hinder you, as a lot of people try and tell me. But no, security very important. Innovation. Again, if you're just going to take your monolithic and rewrite it, you're not really doing much. You're not gaining much. There's a lot of effort in terms of doing that for zero gain. So the business case is kind of limited unless you're also bringing in some new innovations, some new things that you can add to your application as we talk about extending the application into the cloud. So you really have to talk about the innovation and how you bring new things into your microservices as well. Methodology, yeah, you've got to get away from, the standard on-prem type stuff. Agile development, CI/CD pipeline, software planning. There's a whole new different way of programming. There's a whole different architecture and methodology around some of these development principles. It's not just Agile. There's a whole component around development, etc. And that also keys off some of these architectural decisions that you have to make. Service management operations, wow, okay, so you can't take some of the on-prem processes that you do and just run them in the cloud. It just doesn't work. So there is a whole refactoring and a reorganization around your operations teams to be able to manage some of these cloud-native applications. Again, some of that keys off the cultural and organizational changes, but you have to be very, very specific around the service management and operations piece of this. And again, a lot of customers make the mistake of just trying to do what they did on-prem and doing it in the cloud, and of course, it just doesn't work. So there's a whole heap of refactoring and reorganization around the operations team as well. And lastly, of course, we touched briefly on this at the very beginning, but data science and governance. Where do I put the data? Where does it need to be? Do I have any data governance laws around residency? Do I have GDPR? Do I have, privacy concerns about where I put my data? A whole heap of decisions around that, governance of the data, and also I need to be able to make it available to my data scientists to get the insights, to be able to build on the things that I have and do the things that I do. Okay, so those are, as I said, this is the key slide that I have. It's one of the things that I have, a key takeaway that you want to bring from this whole presentation. And it's so important we wrote a book. And we're actually going to give you the link. In this presentation, we're going to give you the link to the book to go and download, take a look at it. The chapters of the book cover the majority of the sections, items that I was talking about before. We're going to be a little bit naughty. We're going to give you the link which allows you to read the first 2 chapters of the book, and then after that you actually have to go to Amazon and actually purchase the book. But it is the best thing since sliced bread. It gives you the ability to get into the secret sauce about what needs to be done in terms of all of the technology around these microservices pieces. Okay, so next I want to talk about matching the workload. So we talked before about how we have the need to be able to go and determine if a workload is suitable to be moved to the cloud. And I put this up just to really give you guys a taste and a range of different places of where you can run workload. And it really depends on what it is, what you're doing with it. And there is a difference between some of this. This slide perhaps should actually show which is in the cloud, as in i.e. not on your premises, but public, dedicated, and bare metal, you can be considered as running in someone else's environment. It's in the cloud, and you get to take your application or workload and put it into the cloud. But private and IT are really on your own data premises. And there are particular reasons of why you might target a piece of workload for each one of these 5 areas. And you need to be able to go through and assess what you've got and determine the right place to be able to put them. And that's a key piece. Once you determine the right place you put them, that determines what you do with them. Do I refactor it? Do I leave it as a VM? Do I just take a particular piece of it? And how do I move it? Really determines on the place that you're actually going to move it to. So these are some key considerations that you need to be able to make up front. And again, really, in terms of maturity and some of these definitions, I think we talked a little bit at the beginning, taking a VM, containerizing it, giving it the 12 factors, adding to it CI/CD pipeline, making it exploit the cloud, and then turning it into a microservices architecture. Again, I'm not going to read this slide. There are inherent benefits for each one of those, and where you are in this line or line and where you want to end up really depends on the application for it. But IBM Cloud Private allows you to be able to take this path from the start to the beginning and really determine which step you want to be able to run in. I am going to switch a little bit about, talk about IBM Cloud Private because I think it's quite key. In the slide previous to this, where I talked about the ability to have an on-prem cloud, and there are some good reasons why you might want to do an on-prem cloud, and data residency security are some of those key ones. Performance, manageability, there's a whole list of them. But IBM Cloud Private really brings to the enterprise the native ability to be able to run your own cloud inside of the data center. And if you had asked customers 18 months ago, do I have a private cloud? They would have said, yes, we have, a virtualized server farm. That's the very beginning of it. That, as I said, allows you to really make best use of the infrastructure, but it doesn't bring into the 12-factor app and really make use of the cloud native compliances. IBM Cloud does. So it brings in this rapid innovation, allows you to take all of the Cloud Foundry, Kubernetes, and different types of environments, bring in an integrated tools chain for you, and really start from that first step in how I migrate and modernize my application. Out of the box, hybrid integration enables to be able to connect securely with all the other services around you, gives you your CAS service, plus the ability to be able to integrate with all of the other things. It leverages your investment in terms of the middleware. It comes with containerized versions of all the IBM middleware. Part of the steps that we talked about before is taking your monolith and then containerizing it along with the middleware. IBM Cloud Private comes with containerized versions of the IBM middleware. So that step is done for you. It's a key piece in investing or leveraging the investments you've already made. And then, yes, compliance and management. All of those core components and core operating pieces that you need to be able to decide on comes with the product. And we'll talk about some of those components as well. Okay. What I want to do is I really want to talk about J2EE and WebSphere in particular, and how do we take a WebSphere application and containerize it and then run it inside of IBM Cloud Private. So that is a particular use case which is of interest to a lot of people. They've been doing this for a long time and it's kind of well known. Interestingly enough, when I first looked at the slide, it has the word optional there. So migrate application code configuration to Liberty optional. Now, it kind of is optional, it's kind of not optional. The reason I say that is that right now, and in fact it's probably available right now, but what you need to do is to take a existing J2EE application, put it inside of WebSphere, and then run WebSphere in the cloud. All you're really doing is taking your WebSphere cluster and running it somewhere else. You're not really making use of this 12-factor app ability to be able to refactor your application. All you're doing is you're taking your WebSphere cluster and running it somewhere else. So if you want to modernize your application and make it cloud ready, then Liberty is the path. You take it, so it's not optional. You run it through Liberty. So you could containerize WebSphere and do it that way. So I'm stating that the Liberty piece of this is not optional if you want to have a modernized application. We'll look at some of the things that you need to be able to do to containerize an application. We have some tooling which goes through and actually does the containerization for you. And then once it's containerized, we allow you to just import that. We have a Helm chart to be able to deploy a Liberty container and run it inside of IBM Cloud Private as if it was a native app, and then use all of the Kubernetes capabilities to manage, scale, and really look after your application for all of this. So there is a link in the bottom of the slide, which is a tutorial to walk you through taking a piece of code, and it can be any code that you've got. It can be a sample app or your own app. And there's a tutorial which takes you through how do I take that J2EE app, how do I run it inside it, Liberty, in terms of do I need to migrate it, is there any configuration that I need to change, containerize it for you, and then deploy it to IBM Cloud Private. So the tutorial there, I encourage everyone to go through, look at the tutorial, and really go through it for this. So what I'd like to do now is look at the solutions that we have. We've talked about the roadmap. We've talked about the steps that you need to be able to take to modernize an application. We in IBM have some solutions to help with this application modernization and really accelerate the adoption of this and get you much faster than you could expect. The first one of these is the IBM Garage. It is really the innovation step of what do I do with an application, how do I add innovation to it, what are the new things that I can do, and how do I take my app and how do I really invigorate it, what are the different things that I can really do. Transformation Advisor, we talked about that earlier on. Well, we'll talk about it. It is the piece of code that you will run in the tutorial, which goes and analyzes a J2EE app. We also have the Cloud Automation Manager. We have a lot of customers, and I mean, I'm hoping that the target for your application, whether it's containerized or microservices, is an IBM Cloud, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And a lot of customers are saying that, you know, I want to be able to have multiple cloud vendors, multiple places in which I run my application. So the Cloud Automation Manager enables you to do that. It has targets for both IBM Cloud, IBM Cloud Private, AWS, Microsoft, Google, and all of the other major cloud providers. So I can take a single source of my application, it can be in my GitHub repository on-prem, and Cloud Automation Manager will manage the deployment of that application to multiple clouds and multiple places. So really quite whizzy, quite cool piece of technology here. And the way we achieve it is we talk natively to each cloud vendor to be able to go and do all the provisioning and the pieces from at the final step of it. So another cool piece of technology to take a look at. And then microclimate. We will talk about it, and I'll put a slide up shortly, which talks about some of the decisions that you have to make in terms of technology, in terms of the tooling that you have to make. But if you don't want to make those decisions, if you want to come in and just have an environment that's pre-built, that has the tooling in place, that has a CI/CD pipeline configured, and all I really need to do is point it at my GitHub repository, configure it up to say this is where my source code is, the microclimate provides you with all of that pre-configured and pre-built CI/CD pipelines and tooling, etc. So all I have to do is really just, you know, start my development and let the tooling handle all the rest of that. So again, some really cool solutions that we have to help you along this modernization track. The Garage, I love the Garage. It's very cool. It really gives you the ability to ideate empower you to bring in new solutions and technologies and really deliver with speed. It really focuses on the MVP, and it's a good way for some of the traditional on-prem data center guys to learn what the cloud is and learn some of the methods and methodologies that they use in the cloud, and really get the two teams talking together. How do I bring them? How do I ideate? How do I make best use of some of the solutions that you have in your organization? Transformation Advisor. So this is a really cool one. As I said before, the tutorial will walk you through using this tool. But what it is, it's a three-step piece of code. You point it, you literally, when you run it up, it asks you for what is the directory of your WebSphere installation. So you tell it where your WebSphere is installed, you tell it the cluster and the applications that are installed in that WebSphere cluster, and then it will go through and it will analyze it. So you can see in this screenshot, we've found 3: query, daytrader, PBW, and a default. And it's looked at it, it's determined what I need to be able to do. Is it something that I can match? Is it something that will go directly to the cloud? In this case, yes, it does. It says it's 100% matched, but it may not be. And what it will do is it will come through and actually tell you what are the libraries that needs to be updated, what are the things, the pieces of code that would need to be changed, what are the things which I need to do in terms of configuration to get my application out of my WebSphere cluster and into a Liberty runtime, and then containerize it for you. So it's really the 2 steps: analyze it. What are the transformation steps that I need to be able to do in terms of runtime environment that I would need to change, and then and it actually creates the Liberty environment, imports it for you, and then puts it inside a container. So again, very, very cool technology, and you can do this yourself. We give it away. It's part of the product, and so you can actually get a containerized version of a WebSphere application up and running very, very fast. Please go and try it out. It's very cool. So I do want to take a look at IBM Cloud Private. I've spoken about it quite a bit, and I've really looked at some of the things that we want to talk about it. But it is primarily Kubernetes. It is a Kubernetes-based platform that we're running here. There is also a flexibility of infrastructure. So the way Kubernetes works, it comes with a couple of key components around management of it, in terms of proxy nodes and control nodes and all the other Kubernetes-based platform. But it also comes with something they call a worker node. And what we've done with IBM Cloud Private is we've made it available so you can run a worker node on P, on Z, on I, on the Z series. And so you can really take your container, import it into the Kubernetes-based platform, and then run it on the infrastructure of your choice. And I cannot emphasize enough how flexible the infrastructure can be. As I said, the worker node running on P to run to download and run a container. If you've got a particular workload that requires the mainframe to be able to be optimized and to run, then I can do that. I can run a worker node on my mainframe and deploy a container to it. I can decide that tomorrow I want to run that container in a P series machine, and so I can move it around and I can optimize both all the software and the services that I have around it. And as I said before, it also comes with this integrated DevOps and management layer that comes out of the box, so that you don't have to worry too much about it. The integration is done. You can choose the tooling, but ICP manages all the integration for you for all of that. I'm going to touch briefly on it. ICP really enables multiple roles, and really you can be one of 2 things. You either are a operations or an admin, and that role, you are really a service provider. So you are providing cloud services for someone else to use, okay? And so the operations admin role, you are responsible for the infrastructure. You get to go and run the actual cloud solution itself and become the provider of cloud services and solutions to the business. And then, yes, the business will come along and provide a developer who will then use the cloud services, and they will develop and modernize and use all the nice features and functions that are provided by IBM Cloud Private. So really the two roles are really what we've concentrated on, and there are multiple use cases that each can satisfy each of these two roles in terms of providing, becoming a cloud provider and becoming an application developer that then ultimately hosts and deploys an application. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, and I'm going to quickly go through what we have as an example. So I'm going to put up what would typically be a JEE app, and I'll walk through some of the things that you might be able to want to do with it, and how you might want to containerize and handle each component of it. Okay. So typically we start off with a UI component. It's written in Java. There's usually a portal or a web page, a mobile application piece of this, and it's really the front end that the user gets to interact with. Then I have a piece of business logic, usually backed end by BFF, and that's typically a piece of business software that's provided by WebSphere, and so there's some infrastructure pieces that I need to put in place for that. That will go through to a business process. So I have a request that's come in from a client to be able to do function A. It gets processed by the business logic, and then there is a BPM process which comes along and actually performs that request at the back end. And then of course I've got my data. So I've got a data and I've got a transaction. I have a particular database which I will be using that supports the process or the request that the customer is there asked for. So typically in a business application, I'm going to have these three pieces or four pieces of code that I really have to deal with. So what I'm going to do is I look at the particular areas, what I can do, what I should do with each of these particular areas for it, and what are my options. So if I start with the left-hand side, I've got my data, okay? And as I said, we have a data governance piece of this. We need to determine what do we do with it. You know, do I lift it? Do I shift it? Do I optimize it? Do I replicate it around the world? What do I do with the data, and how do I do my data governance? So those are particular questions that needed to be answered as part of the technology decisions. But typically we will find is that, yes, you will need to move some of it. If you're going to move some of it and refactor it into the cloud and put some of it into the private cloud, then you need to move the data. You need to make it close to where it needs to be. No point in having you know, a large slow pipe between the user and where the data is. So you do need to optimize it, and location for it is key. The governance people will tell you where and what you can do with it. So there are some decisions around that. The middle two pieces are typically refactored, they're containerized, and they're exposed and extended. So this is where you take some of the standard business logic, some of the middleware, and you containerize it. And then you run some of these things either on-prem, as said, or in the cloud, depending on the particular requirements that you have for it. So typically you would take your middleware, extend it, and you can start to include additional services then. You start to bring in not only the standard BPM processes, but let's bring in blockchain, let's bring in some of these other analytics pieces, which also provides additional services to the user on the front end. And then yes, I've got my UI, which I then start to refactor as a microservice. This is where some of these, once I've containerized it, what do I do with it? But this is where the developer earns his or her pay packet, and they're the ones that are actually responsible for breaking up some of these larger components into microservices, and then deploying them out into the edge. Okay, so there are some advantages for it, and we need to be very clear on why you would want to do microservices, and really some of the factors around it. But it is a small set of services. It is based on a business capability. So when you define what you have and how you define the breakup of a monolithic application, you need to determine the size of the development team that's building that or looking after that piece of code, but also base it on a business capability. Make sure that it's a particular function that's represented by a business unit, and there's a particular need and a sponsor for it, because they're the ones that will tell you, do I need to add it, do I need to change it, do I need to just maintain it, and can I share it? Can I take this one business service and share it amongst other business units as well? Needs to be agile, as before we talked about. Each microservice has its own individual CI/CD pipeline, so in effect they are independently deployed and therefore independently changed. You can apply changes to them without affecting other microservices. What you're doing is as long as you are maintaining backwards compatibility of any API that you're providing to another microservice, what you do inside of your microservice is really up to the team. Okay. It can be of different languages, it can be of different things as well. And then you can, of course, once you've done that, you can scale, you can maintain code bases, which is smaller and easier to manage. And then you've got minimal deployment time, minimal downtime, and you start to get take some real advantages of the scalability that you have. Again, this is just another picture which really deposes the difference between a monolithic and an application. So I see we have a poll and here. So I don't know if you guys on the call can see the poll, but there's a couple of questions that we're going to ask. In terms of what's holding back microservices adoption on your organization. Go through the poll and just let us know some of the answers to it, and we'll go back and take a look. Okay. You do need to make some decisions, as I said before. Part of the architectural things that you need to do up front, do I, am I using Java? Am I using Spring Boot? Am I using some Liberty code? What sort of cloud native language am I actually going to be able to do it in? Am I using APIs, Node.js? Is there a services SDK piece of this? And really, how do I containerize my build packs as well? So there are some decisions around the type of language and the type of platform and build pack that you're going to be using. And, even do I go to Swift? Do I use Swift as a build pack? Node.js? These are all decisions that you're going to have to make. And then, I also need to look at machine learning. So a lot of people are using Python to be able to go and do some of these things. But these are decisions that you'll need to be able to make in terms of which frameworks and which languages do I make as part of my decision to go through. I said before that we would go through and look at some of the decisions that you would have to make. These are not the end all and be all, by the way, but what I did here is I've broken them down into the different areas that you might want to consider when you're making some of these decisions. So really, in terms of languages, I do have a whole heap of decisions to make in terms of my application stack around the Nova. Java, Node.js, Swift, etc. What key libraries do I have? How do I do circuit breakers and some of the fail-safe organizations for all this? And then that's just the application. But in terms of the refactoring into a microservice, I have a whole lot of fabric, and here it's called fabric, but these are common services that need to be able to be used across each of my microservices. So how do I do discovery? How do I do my logging? How do I do monitoring, messaging? How do I implement security? And how do I control the config? So these are common decisions that you want to be able to make across microservices so that they're all reusable. I don't want to have a particular monitoring service for one application or one microservice which is not applicable to another. And so these are architectural decisions that you make across and make available to all microservices rather than just individually between them. And then, of course, I have a DevOps. I have a whole heap of how do I manage it, how do I deploy it, and how do I maintain it type decisions, which are really the operational side of things. How do I take and how do I integrate operations into it, and how do I give developers the ability to submit a code change into GitHub, for example, and have that automatically built and deployed as a container. And how do I roll that out, and how do I have my operations staff maintain it? So these are operational decisions that you have to make in terms of it. And as I said, if you have the microclimate piece of this, we have a default stack of all of these three areas pre-built into the microclimate piece of technology. And of course, it's all running on top of Kubernetes as an orchestration piece of this, or Cloud Foundry, if you wish, inside of IBM Cloud Private. One thing I do want to talk about, and I'm going to open it up for questions shortly, but I kind of skipped over this, but we have to really take a look at the difference between high availability and disaster recovery. I've talked a lot about 12-factor apps and how that if you have a 12-factor app, it gives you these cloud-native abilities. High availability is inherent in a 12-factor app. Okay, it's one of those things that you build into it, and it becomes part of it. So as you deploy a container into Kubernetes, Kubernetes will maintain it and make it highly available. You know, if a container fails and dies, Kubernetes will start up another one. So you are maintaining the availability of your application, but that is not DR. Okay, so there is another component to this in terms of making your application DR compliant as well. And really, what you're doing then is you're running the cluster, and I call it the Kubernetes cluster, but you're running that cluster across multiple data centers. And you have a set of decisions to make about how do I synchronize my data across multiple I'll say data centers, but it can be multiple cloud providers, about multiple locations in terms of DR. So I've got a highly available 12-factor app, but I need to make sure that it's running across 2 locations to ensure I have a DR component of this, and I also need to make sure that I replicate my data and that all of that stuff is there is inherent as well. So please, DR is a key component. It's not inherent in HA, which a lot of people have made the mistake in considering as well. So please look at some of that. Okay. I have some calls to action, some next steps, and then I'm going to open up for questions. Please go and visit the IBM Garage. We looked at the Garage at the beginning as an enabler, but the IBM Garage really does talk about microservices architectures and what are the good things you can have and how do you innovate. I also talked about IBM Cloud Private. The good news is that IBM Cloud Private comes in a couple of editions, but if you are using the Community Edition, it's of no charge. You can download it and you can use it. There is no charge for it. It's effectively free. My marketing guys don't like it when I say free, but it is. There are some limitations to it. So for example, you can't do HA. So you can only have one worker node, for example. So you can, if you want to have an application and you want to put it into production, you can't use the community edition because you won't be able to have an HA or highly available application. But everything else is all there. All of the abilities in terms of CI/CD pipeline, integration, running containers, all of that stuff is there for you to download and use for free. Okay, and then yes, please go through and look at the Transformation Advisor. Look at how do I take a WordSphere application, migrate it to Liberty, put it in a container, and then deploy it to Kubernetes. So again, the Transformation Advisor tutorial is there on how to do some of this. So those are 3 things which I really encourage you to all do. Learn some more. Start looking at building the private cloud. Start looking at the path that you would need to take to do some of these refactoring piece of this. For all of this, 3 practices. We've talked about the garage. We've talked about professional services. Each of these 3 practices have 5 principles of deployment, 5 things which they do in terms of providing value, and then countless capabilities. We also have a couple of foundational services which we can go and engage. So if you do need us to come in and look at, kickstarting some of this off, do you need, a workload assessment piece of this to come in? So we have a 2-week set of consulting services that will come in and do a real quick assessment for you, get you up and running, and really just get your feet wet in terms of what some of the things that you can do. But then there's a more advanced one. If you've got a larger application, then we may need to do some design thinking, we may need to do architectural consultancy, and so there's an advanced series of this as well. So 2 different options of engaging professional services to come and help you out with your path. And then in the client centers, we actually have it installed and running, so you can actually go down to the client centers and use it, see it running, have a demo of it. So reach out to the team here if you wish to and do it. Although we have 2 physical centers, this cloud, so you can actually have these demos in your own premises. Demo it from your home premises, but it's running in the ICC inside of India. All right, so I'm going to open it up for questions. I think we're running almost close to the bottom of the hour, or top of the hour. I am going to open it for questions. I am available. Reach out to me. I'm not sure how we do questions. Do we have some from the chat? Do we people want to ask?
Sure, Richard. I'll take it from here. Ladies and gentlemen, we start the Q&A session. Participants may use the chat option to ask a question. I repeat, participants may use the chat option for asking the questions. Richard, we have the first question. What are the 12 components to convert app into microservices?
Okay, so the 12-factor app, 12 factors of an app. Okay, so really the easiest thing to do is actually just go and Google, right? Go 12 factors. I'm going to do it as well. You can't see my screen, but I'm going to do it here. 12-factor app, and there is a website that comes up straight away called 12factor.net. And you click on it, it'll actually go through and look at in detail all of the 12 factors that you need to take into consideration when you're building this. And it's quite comprehensive. It looks at each of them in terms of what you need to be able to do. So, for example, the very first one is a code base. So you need one single code base tracked with revisions controls and the ability to be able to deploy it. The second one is dependencies. So you need to be able to explicitly declare dependencies and isolate dependencies as well. So there's a whole set of examples and principles behind how you would actually implement each of these 12 factors inside of an application. And as I said before, it's key to you getting to a microservice, because if your application doesn't adhere to any of these factors or 12-factor apps, all you're doing is you're taking your application and running it somewhere else. But as I said earlier on, a lot of customers will analyze all 12 of these and say, you know what, I'm only really going to comply to 8 or 10 or a certain number of these. And it depends on your priorities in your business app. And there's some of the architectural decisions that you make up front as to which you adhere to. But you do need to go through and adhere to some, otherwise you're not making use of the cloud. You're just running your app somewhere else. Good question.
Thank you very much. We move on to the next question. We have a participant who is looking for cons or selling points converting monolith to microservices.
So really it's about, there's a number of reasons behind it. Most of them is a lot of the times customers have gone to the extent of virtualizing it. They said, hey, I need to optimize my costs. You know, everyone has this remit from their CFO, save me some money, you know, times are tough. So they go through the virtualization and server consolidation piece of this. But then what happens is that the cloud, that has led to the whole cloud revolution or evolution, if you like, of I need to get to market faster. You know, I can you know, put my application up on the cloud and I can run it, but how do I bring new features and new functions into my application faster? How do I meet customer needs and demands at speed? It's the speed piece of this, probably my very first slide that I put up. Not just the cost piece of this. That's been done and dusted. Most people have got what they can out of the cost piece of this. Next is the ability to speed. You know, I want to be able to beat my competition. You know, you've all heard of the Ubers that are going to come along and eat my lunch. Everyone's scared of the competition that's going to come in and provide a better service and take customers away from you. So you need to be able to be in a position to quickly and easily deploy a new app which provides better service to your customers to retrain and attract customers from everywhere else. So it's the speed. And if you've got a monolithic app, it takes time. You just don't have that ability to be able to roll out new feature and functions at the speed that you would have if you have a you know, a containerized or a microservice application.
We move on to the next question. We have 8 Spring Boot microservices deployed in Wildfly having Postgres as DB. Want to move to ICP? Your take on that?
So yeah, I'm assuming that the microservices are containerized, and I'm assuming that they would run in a Docker container. That's basically what we do. So if I take a step back, there was a couple of different options in terms of containers and the container platform that you could run it in. So my first assumption is that yes, your microservices have been containerized, but there is another assumption which I need to make, and that is that it's Docker that you're running. What we found is that the container war, and I call it a war because there were many options in it, has kind of been won by Docker as the default de facto standard for the industry of how you run and manage containers. But then the orchestration layer on top of the Docker platform has been Kubernetes, and that decision, the industry came to that conclusion relatively quickly. It was less than about 6 months from the time people started to evaluate containers to when people have said, hey, you know, I've decided on and we're standardized on Docker and Kubernetes. And even to the fact where Docker themselves Docker has their own orchestration engine in the form of Docker Swarm, but they have actually bundled and they're putting in Kubernetes into their own Docker platform as well. So the industry has moved to Docker and Kubernetes as a default de facto standard. If you are that, you can run all of that inside of IBM Cloud Private. You can take those containers, you can load them up into a Helm chart and import them in and run them. Have Kubernetes manage them. And bring to all of those containers all of the flexibility and all the additional services that ICP provides in terms of monitoring and integration and all of the CI/CD pipeline and all of that sort of stuff. So the hard bit's done. If you've got a microservices in a container, the hard bit's done. Running them inside of the different container services, the easy bit. Yeah. And what I would do is recommend take my second call to action, download IBM Cloud Private Enterprise Edition. It's no charge. Run it up, import them in, and see how you go. I'm pretty confident. In fact, I'm 1,000% confident you'll be able to run them up and you'll be good to go. Next question.
Sure. We have a question from a participant. How can we cloudify the legacy application without modernizing and working on cloud product? Example, IBM IIB.
I'm not sure I understand the question. So IIB is it's a middleware component that is in the process. So IBM is containerizing all of its middleware. IIB is the last to be containerized. It's right now, and this will change, and it changes almost weekly. But right now, if you look on the web, there's some really good white papers, and it's actually a couple of white papers written by Tim Dunn, a really good friend of mine, on how to run IIB in AWS in the container. You'll be able to do the same in IBM Cloud Private, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think today, right now, it's officially supported, but it's coming very soon. So all of the middleware components will be available as containers inside of ICP. So if it's not available today, give it a couple of weeks. The stuff is coming out thick and fast. I'm not sure that was the question that you asked, though. That was the only thing.
Thank you, Richard. Ladies and gentlemen, due to the paucity of time, we take one last question, which is, what are the provisions for microservices architectures for moving existing workloads to the cloud being a startup?
Yeah, so we have a methodology. The Transformation Advisor will give you a starting point. You'll be able to analyze the code, but the Transformation Advisor assumes it's a J2EE application, right? It really looks at containerizing that. If it's not J2EE and it's a homegrown, or it's an application which was based on another language, then there are a set of methodologies that we apply to it to determine its eligibility to move, and that's really a week's worth of consulting. So I don't know if you guys can see my screen still, but we had a foundational services offering, which was really 2 weeks to come in, do a quick deployment of IBM Cloud Private, and then really assess some workload that you could put into it. Gives you a starting point of 1 or 2 workloads that you could move, and part of that, those 2 weeks, would be that the services team would come in and run you through the methodology, run you through some of the key decision points that you would need to assess to move a workload into ICP. So I would recommend get hold of the services guys. 2 weeks of foundational services would get you a IBM Cloud Private platform and the ability to identify and move a couple of pieces of workload into ICP.
Thank you very much for answering these questions, Richard. We turn the program back to you for final remarks.
Yeah, so I wanted to spend the time with you. A lot of the stuff I know is common, and a lot of people realize that, you know, that there's that a lot of what I've been saying is not new. But I want to go back to that slide where I said if there's one key takeaway from this presentation, it's this slide. It's the slide of there were 9 things on it which talked about the secret sauce, the things that you need to be able to do around this as well. Many, many customers have been down this path and have tried to do this and have failed. And failed badly because they haven't taken into these things into consideration. And so if you're going to embark on a microservices or an application modernization roadmap, yeah, these are the things that you really need to look at and take a note to make sure you're successful. The Cloud Adoption book will walk you through a lot of it. But the services guys, especially in the Solution Initiation Workshop, will also are going to be key to your success as well. You know, reach out. I really encourage you to read the book, download ITP from the link. As it is free, and embark on it, and then reach out to someone on the team and get the services guys to walk you through some of this. So please, the technology is easy. The technology is out there. It's not hard. It's pretty common. The bits around it, all of the things around data governance, you know, controls, all of those. As I said, those are the key components that you really need to address along the way. And that's probably one of my key takeaways for you guys.
Thank you.